Fellas, I'm going to be going through all 14 pay-per-views this year and picking out one bad thing or the worst part about the pay-per-view. This is going to counteract the video that I did yesterday where I picked out the best part, but there's definitely been some pretty shit moments in every pay-per-view. You know, things that went wrong. Some happened in more pay-per-views than others. But yeah, we're just going to go into it from UFC 283. Obviously, I'm going to be going over it pretty quickly because we have quite a lot of pay-per-views to go through. And as always, if you've got any opinions of your own or, you know, you have to pick the worst part of every pay-per-view, let me know. But UFC 283, the worst part about this pay-per-view for me was definitely the Brazilian fans. This wasn't even a bad card. Like, I'm going to talk about the main event specifically because that's where the Brazilian crowds really showed their true colours, which isn't a surprise to us because they've done it before, right? But Glover Teixeira and Jamal Hill, they have a great fight, back and forth. Well, it was mainly Jamal Hill beating him up, but, you know, it was a war, it was a good fight. And then just because Glover Teixeira didn't win the decision, the entire crowd just walk out on him, ruin what could have been a great retirement. Look at Korean Zombie's retirement. He lost in a worse way than Glover Teixeira. He got knocked out. And I know that, you know, he was in Singapore, but he got knocked out, and then you've still got the crowd that made the retirement so much better. That's one of the best retirements, even though he got knocked out. And now you've got Glover Teixeira losing a decision at 40 odd years old in a title fight. And just because he didn't win the decision, you've got all the fucking Brazilian crowds walking out. It just kind of ruined it. And then you've got the co-main event as well. Brandon Moreno beating one of their fighters, so they just start throwing shit at him, and it just ruins the card. And I feel like if this card would have been, you know, taking place in any other kind of area with a better crowd, like Las Vegas or any other place, I think it would have made the card much more better, and Glover Teixeira would have had a much better retirement. So I'm going to say the worst part about UFC 283 is the Brazilian fans. UFC 284. The worst part about this for me was people crying about the decision. It was a good fight. It was one of the best fights of the year, actually. You know, best versus the best. You know, Volkanovski challenging double champ status. And then just because Volkanovski didn't win the decision in what was an amazing fight and a close fight mixed with grappling and striking, there was so many people online crying about the decision. Rather than just acknowledging that it was a good fight and, you know, complimenting both fighters, it was just a bunch of fans or people just, you know, whinging about the fact that Volkanovski didn't win the decision. And it kind of ruined it for me. I wish people would have been more kind of complimentary of the fight, rather than just, you know, screaming robbery. And it wasn't even a robbery. I would have given it to Islam Makhachev. The best result that Volkanovski could have got was a draw. I don't see how Volkanovski won. Fair enough if you think he might have won, but, you know, people going online and just constant just whinging about the fact that Volkanovski didn't win, I feel like it kind of ruined the fight for me. Well, it didn't ruin the fight, but it, you know, I wish people would have accepted the outcome more. And yeah, that's what I'm going to say the worst part about 284 is, because the card itself was actually pretty good. There were so many good fights on this card. Anyway, UFC 285. The worst part about this was the beginning of John Jones holding up the division. Now, as excited as I was for John Jones to come back, and as good as it was, him coming back, and it kind of ruined it because he's now been holding up the division. First of all, we've got John Jones versus Cyril Gane, which happened earlier this year. And then he was supposed to fight Stipe, which is holding up the division in itself because Stipe doesn't deserve a title shot when we've got people like Aspinall. And then, you know, John Jones is injured. Fair enough, I know it's not his fault, but then refusing to vacate the belt when we've got people like Aspinall, like you've got Yuri Prohaska and Jamal Hill vacating so the division can move. And I feel like John Jones not vacating, and I'm not saying he has to and it's all his fault, but it definitely held up the division. And then we've got Aspinall as an interim champion, and we've actually got an interim champion who's not going to be fighting the champion in his next fight, which kind of begs the question, why was Aspinall versus Pavlovich for the interim belt if he's not going to be fighting for the belt next? It doesn't make any sense. Jones is holding up the division. I'm not saying it's all his fault, and I wouldn't blame him if I was in his position, but him holding up the division ever since coming back at UFC 285, I feel like as much as, you know, we've got a lot of contenders in the heavyweight division, but him kind of just refusing to fight these guys, I feel like it slows the division down and definitely ruins it for me. So that's what I'm going to say the worst part of 285 is. 286. I feel like the card should have had much more high-level English fighters on the card. It felt like you get rid of the main and the co-main event, and the rest of the card just felt like a pretty shitty fight night. Gunnar Nelson versus Brian Barberena as a featured fight. It just got, this card just wasn't stacked enough for me, and I wish there was more high-level English fighters. I'm talking like Tom Aspinall versus Tabora. Now, I know Aspinall was still technically during the recovery phase of his leg injury, but I'm pretty sure he'd already recovered by now. I'm not even sure if he was in the phase. I think he might have been recovered by now, because I remember him saying that if they want him on 286, they'll get him on 286. So I feel like Aspinall Tabora could have definitely been on this card, and it's not like it's an extremely challenging fight for Aspinall. Even Holloway Arnold Allen, I know that was, you know, after UFC 287, but if we were to just push that back a bit to UFC 286, that would have been an amazing featured fight. I just feel like it wasn't stacked enough. It didn't really have any moments throughout the entire card. I mean, there was a good fight in Gaethje-Fiziev, which kind of made the card much better, but quite a poor main card. I wish there was a few more English fighters on it, and yeah, that's my one critique for UFC 286. UFC 287, for me, the worst part was Pereira getting slept. Yeah, this was pretty sad. Pereira is one of my favourite fighters. I think a lot of you can agree as well. To see him go out there and get knocked out by Israel Adesanya, it was pretty sad, especially when he was winning the rivalry 3-0. Imagine how funny it would have been to see Alex go 4-0. Now, I'm not just one of these people who are going to kind of jump on the Izzy hate bandwagon, but Izzy's just been pretty annoying since then. He's turned into the guy who sat in a bar going, I beat that guy one time, because he's lost to Sean Strickland, and now that Pereira's become a champion, Izzy has no belt. The loss has kind of aged well for Pereira and bad for Izzy, but I just wish Izzy didn't get the knockout. It was a good knockout from Izzy, I'll give it him. It was definitely one of the best knockouts this year, if not the best knockout this year, so fair play to Adesanya, but seeing Alex Pereira lose in that fashion was horrible. Like, I wouldn't even mind if he lost like a decision to Jan Blachowicz, if Jan Blachowicz was able to keep him down, but the fact that he got knocked out in the way that he did, it was sad to see, and I hope Pereira never gets slept like that again. Maybe he was just returning the favour because, you know, he put Adesanya in an oxygen tank before, but either way, Pereira getting slept was definitely the saddest highlight of 287. 288, I'm going to say the worst part was the entire card. It was the worst card of the year. I hated this card. It was boring, it wasn't stacked. We were originally supposed to see Oliveira versus Dariush on the co-main event of, you know, Sterling Cejudo, which would have been a way better co-main event than Belal and Burns. So it was actually settling on to be a decent card. And then obviously that fight gets, you know, taken apart because Oliveira gets injured. They replace it with Burns versus Belal Muhammad, which at first it kind of made sense, and I still think it does make sense, to be honest, because it was, you know, they both wanted a title shot, so if we match them up against each other, the winner can get the next title shot, and that's kind of what's happening now with Belal Muhammad getting the shot. But it wasn't an interesting fight, surprise, surprise. It was just Belal Muhammad beating up an injured Burns in a slow-paced snooze fest. Now, did he pin him on the floor for 5 rounds? No, but it was a bit of a boring back and forth on the feet, but it was mainly Belal Muhammad just beating him up, and it was kind of boring. And then we go on to the main event, Sterling Cejudo. I don't think anyone had expectations of that fight being like an all-out war, like an absolute brawl, but that didn't really perform either. It was a little bit boring at times. It wasn't the most interesting. Overall, the card just wasn't really stacked. It didn't really perform well, and for that reason, I'm going to say that 288 has been the worst card we've had this year. I know it's not entirely the UFC's fault, but then that brings us on to UFC 289. And in my opinion, the worst thing about this card was the fact that the women headlined a pay-per-view. I hope the UFC never do this again. I'd much rather see women as co-main events on a pay-per-view, or at least women headlining a fight night. I don't want to see women headlining an actual pay-per-view because it's not going to sell. The fact that Oliveira is under Amanda Nunes on a pay-per-view is horrific. I don't think that should have ever happened because people are just going to switch up after the co-main event. I understand, you know, title priorities. If you're a champion, you're going to be above people who aren't fighting for the belt, but still kind of ruins it for me. I think the UFC should have moved the women's fight to 288. It might have been a bit disrespectful, but who cares? Move the women's fight to the co-main of 288, so now we have 2 title fights, and then we make Oliveira versus Dariush the main event, and then we bring Belal Muhammad versus Burns onto this card and make that the co-main event. I feel like that would have made both these cards much better, but the fact that women headlined a pay-per-view, and it wasn't a terrible fight, but if you're trying to sell a fight, you can't headline it with women. I'm sorry, I don't care who the woman is, unless it's like a massive star like Ronda Rousey back in the day. This shouldn't be happening, so I'm going to say women headlining a pay-per-view was the biggest mistake of this card. 290, this was a stacked card, but the worst part of it for me was seeing Robert Whittaker lose badly. Again, one of the nicest fighters in the UFC. This guy's just chill, he gets on with it, he fights, he beats the shit out of most of the guys, he's got some of the smoothest striking in the middleweight division, and he just gets on with it. And to see him lose to a guy, and listen, I like Dricus du Plessis, I'm actually picking him to win against Strickland, but to see him lose to a guy that went life and death against Darren Till and Derek Brunson. I don't know why I spelled Derek Brunson like that. I don't think that's how you spell Derek. Or maybe it is and I'm just making things up. But either way, seeing him lose to Dricus du Plessis in the fashion that he did, getting pretty much mauled by him, it was unexpected. I'll give it him. It did, you know, add some spice to the card because no one was expecting that, but just seeing Whittaker lose, I don't care who he loses to, even though it was to a guy that went life and death against Darren Till and Brunson. Seeing Whittaker lose in that fashion is never good. We saw it before with Adesanya when he knocked him out, and seeing him lose like that again, it's kind of sad to see. And again, this card wasn't that bad, so this wasn't terrible. I'm not going to say this is as bad as, you know, Pereira getting knocked out, but it's horrible seeing Whittaker lose. So I'm going to say that's the worst part of 290. 291, the worst part we got robbed of the matchup. Wonderboy versus Pereira cancelled last minute. This was, you know, the build up to this fight. We all knew this was going to be one of the most exciting fights ever. It was a perfect matchup. You've got two entertaining kickboxers going at it. This was a recipe for success. On a card like UFC 291, this was meant to be amazing. On the main card as well. And then last minute, you know, Pereira had to miss weight, and then Wonderboy refused to fight. So the fight got cancelled, and then we didn't even get to see the fight, and it all just went to shit. And we didn't even get to see a replacement fight. Imagine we got to see Wonderboy fight. I wouldn't even mind if he fought a random bum. As long as we get to see Wonderboy fight, but we didn't. Both of them didn't fight on that night. Instead, they just moved Derek Lewis to the main card. But this was going to be such an exciting fight. And the fact that it got taken off the card, it kind of ruined it for me. Don't get me wrong, the card was still stacked. And even the Ikram Aliskerov versus Paulo Costa was supposed to be on this card as well, and that got taken off. So I'm going to say that Wonderboy Pereira being cancelled last minute did kind of hurt and ruin the card a little bit, even though it was still an insane card. I just would have loved to see this fight. But yeah, I'm going to say that was the worst part of 291. 292, we had to listen to Ian Gary in the press conference in the build-up. The whole build-up against Neil Magny, trying to twist his words to make him seem like a child beater, make him seem like a bad person. And the amount of people that have gone off, you know, taking that away and now gone and shown hate to Neil Magny. It was just so annoying listening to this guy in the press conference. Him saying that everyone's watching this pay-per-view for him, even though 2 fights ago he was on like the early prelims of a pay-per-view. Or it might have been 3 fights ago. No, I'm pretty sure it was 2 fights ago. But either way, this guy's so annoying. He ruined the press conference. You know, trying to bully Neil Magny, twisted his words, made him seem like a bad person. Goes in the fight, couldn't even beat Neil Magny with one leg. It was, and don't get me wrong, he was beating the shit out of him, but couldn't even finish him. I mean, Ian Gary in this whole build-up was so irritating, and I feel like he ruined the card. And that's why I wanted to see him at the UFC 296 press conference, because there was no one for him to bully. He would have been the guy getting bullied. So, yeah, Ian Gary as a whole just ruined the UFC 292 for me. UFC 293, again, another loser, a guy losing. Tai Tuivasa's losing streak continues. This guy, I miss watching Tai Tuivasa sleep someone and then go and have a shoey. I miss it when he slept Derek Lewis. No hate on Derek Lewis, but I loved it when he knocked out Derek Lewis, immediately went for the shoey, and I just want to see Tuivasa do that one more time. This guy is struggling. He can't even survive. Finished by Cyril Gane, finished by Pavlovich, now he's been finished by Volkov. And now he's gone to the point where he's fighting people like Marcin Tybura. This guy was literally like one fight away, one win away from a title shot. And now he's fighting the guys, you know, the names like Marcin Tybura, who's just been knocked out cold by Aspinall. He's one of the best personalities in the sport as well. And the more he keeps losing, the lower down on the cards he's going to go. I'm pretty sure, I don't think he's going to be fighting in like a press conference in his next fight. Like, I don't think he's going to be on a press conference, which is kind of annoying. So, Tuivasa, he just keeps losing. He's just pretty irritating, man. Mauled by Pavlovich. Now we get to see, now we, you know, saw him lose to Volkov. How long do we have to wait to see this guy get a win? A knockout into a shoey. That's all I want to see. I'm sick of seeing Tuivasa lose. So I'm going to say that's the worst part of 293. 294. The Doctor, he ruined fights earlier on this card as well, but the main thing that the Doctor did that was terrible was Johnny Walker versus Magomed Ankalaev getting ruined. I was so excited for this fight because it would have definitely been like a #1 contender fight, or at least whoever won this fight wouldn't have been far from a title shot. And I know it's been rescheduled to January 2024, but this would have made the card so much better. Like, we had 4 fights on the main card. Pretty much what happened, Ankalaev took him down, went for an illegal knee. Johnny Walker looked absolutely fine, by the way. He didn't look affected by the illegal knee at all. Doctor comes in. Now, what should have happened is he should have been, you know, are you ready to fight? Yeah, I'm ready to fight. You know, make the fight again. Instead, the fight got cancelled off the most... It was just a ridiculous outcome. Johnny Walker looked ready to fight. Bro, they were fighting after the fight got cancelled. They were both trying to scrap each other in the octagon. The Doctor ruined it. He ruined the entire card, to be honest with you. Worst Doctor in UFC history. And I wish we saw this fight. It would have been a good fight. It would have made sense. And like I said, I know it's been rescheduled, but this getting taken off the card, it kind of ruined the card for me. It was such a weird card. So I'm going to say UFC 294. That's the one part that I didn't like about the card. UFC 295. The controversy of Pereira's knockout. Yeah, it was such an epic title fight. An epic knockout delivered by Alex Pereira. and then he knocks out Yuri Prohaska, and it looked like he was out, and Yuri Prohaska admitted that he was out, but there's still people nowadays saying that it was a fluke, saying that it was an early stoppage. Yuri was fine, and again, pretty similar to UFC 284, I feel like that backlash online kind of ruined the outcome, because not a lot of people, you know, are giving Pereira respect for this knockout. And knocking out Yuri Prohaska in the way that he did, you've got to give him credit. And there's just so many people saying it was an early stoppage. And once again, like I said with 284, I just wish people would have accepted the knockout more, because it was a pretty fucking good knockout. And I'm going to say that's that's one thing I can take out of UFC 295, which just really annoyed me, because this was an insane card. There wasn't many bad moments throughout the entire card, but I just wish more people were, you know, acceptance of the main event and just accepted the fact that the knockout was a legitimate knockout. It might have looked like it was early, but either way, it kind of ruined it. It just irritated me the way people were acting about this knockout. And then finally, 296. The worst part, it's got to be Ferguson losing again. And I feel like we say this every time Ferguson fights, but this really did feel like Ferguson losing to Pimlet was just horrible, man. Losing to Paddy Pimlet, of all people. This guy went from going in talks to fighting Habib to getting mauled by Paddy Pimlet, and it wasn't even a close fight. This was the easiest opponent he's been given in years, and seeing him lose to Paddy Pimlet, it kind of just, it shows that there's no hope left for Tony Ferguson. Like a couple fights ago, he got to the point where it was like, okay, maybe Ferguson, if he fights someone unranked, he'll be able to pick up a win. If we stop giving him contenders, he might get a win. This is the easiest opponent he could have beaten in so long, and it wasn't even a close fight. His losing streak's now on 7. I know I've been saying this for the past few fights, but we need Ferguson to retire, and watching him lose in the way he did, it was very depressing. And I'm going to say that's the saddest part of UFC 293, just watching Ferguson lose again. But that is the worst part of every pay-per-view, in my opinion. Let me know what you think. Let me know what your what you think the worst part of every pay-per-view was. And yeah, thank you for watching.